was just past midnight when I saw her, a lone figure standing by the roadside, her silhouette illuminated by my headlights. As I approached, I could see she was shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I slowed down, my conscience getting the better of me. Rolling down the window, I called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" She turned, relief washing over her pale face. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, quickly climbing into my car. "I've been lost for hours. Can you take me to Maple Street?" I nodded, pulling back onto the road. The woman was young, probably in her mid-20s, with long, dark hair and wide, frightened eyes. She kept glancing nervously out the window, as if expecting something to appear from the darkness. "I'm Sarah," I said, trying to break the tension. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Emma." As we drove, Emma remained silent, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. The atmosphere in the car grew heavy, an inexplicable unease settling over me. I tried to shake it off, focusing on getting her to her destination. Finally, I spotted the sign for Maple Street. "Here we are," I announced, pulling over. Emma murmured a quick thanks and practically leaped out of the car. I watched her hurry down the street, disappearing into the shadows. Relieved to have completed my good deed for the night, I turned around, ready to head home. Little did I know, my nightmare was just beginning. I drove for about 10 minutes, following the familiar route home, but something felt off. The streets looked different, unfamiliar in the darkness. I chalked it up to fatigue and kept driving. Suddenly, I realized I was back on Maple Street, right where I'd dropped off Emma. "What the hell?" I muttered, confused. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. Shaking my head, I turned around and tried again. This time, I paid extra attention to every turn, every street sign. But after another 15 minutes of driving, I found myself back on Maple Street. My heart began to race. This wasn't possible. As I sat there, engine idling, I noticed movement in my rearview mirror. A figure was walking towards my car. It was Emma, but something was different. Her walk was more purposeful, almost predatory. As she got closer, I could see her face in the mirror. Her eyes were completely black, and her mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin. Panic gripped me. I slammed on the gas, tires screeching as I sped away. I drove faster than before, taking random turns, desperate to find my way out of this nightmare. But no matter which direction I went, which streets I took, I always ended up back on Maple Street. And each time, Emma was there. Sometimes standing on the sidewalk, sometimes in the middle of the road. Always watching, always grinning. With each appearance, she looked less human. Her skin grew paler, her limbs longer and more twisted. I was trapped in an endless loop, with a creature that was clearly not the lost woman I'd tried to help. And I was running out of options. After what felt like hours of futile driving, I decided to stop and ask for help. I spotted a gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope in the darkness. I pulled in, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The station appeared deserted, but the lights were on. I approached the door, relief washing over me as I saw movement inside. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his back to me. "Excuse me," I called out as I entered, the bell above the door jingling. "I'm lost and I can't seem to find my way out of town. Could you help me?" The man didn't respond, didn't even move. "Sir," I said louder this time, approaching the counter. "I really need some help." Slowly the man turned around, my blood ran cold. His face was Emma's, wearing that same terrifying grin. But his body remained that of an old man, creating a nightmarish juxtaposition. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the door. The bell jingled again, but this time it sounded like mocking laughter. "You can't leave," the Emma-faced man said, his voice a discordant mix of young woman and elderly man. "You're part of it now." I fumbled for the door handle, my eyes never leaving the grotesque figure. As soon as I got it open, I ran to my car, my heart pounding in my ears. Back on the road, I drove aimlessly, my mind reeling from what I just experienced. What was happening? What did it mean that I was part of it now? And most importantly, how could I escape? As I drove, the town began to change. Buildings warped, their structures twisting into impossible shapes. Street signs melted, the letters rearranging themselves into nonsensical words. The sky turned a sickly green, casting an eerie glow over everything. And everywhere I looked, I saw Emma. She was in every window, behind every tree, reflected in every puddle. Sometimes she looked human, other times she was a grotesque monster. but always, always watching. I tried everything I could think of to escape. I abandoned my car and tried to run, but my legs felt like lead, and I always ended up back where I started. I tried to call for help, but my phone only showed Emma's face on the screen, her laughter echoing from the speakers. Exhausted and terrified, I finally stopped at a park bench. As I sat there, head in my hands, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't need to look to know it was her. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from screaming. "Because you saw me," Emma's voice replied, but it wasn't coming from beside me. It was coming from inside my head. "Because you tried to help, and now you're mine." I looked up, and the world around me shimmered like a mirage. For a moment, I saw the truth. This wasn't a town. It was a trap. A supernatural spider's web, and I was the latest fly to be caught. And Emma? She was the spider, feeding off the fear and despair of those she ensnared. As this realization washed over me, I felt a strange calm settle in. If this was a trap, there had to be a way out. Every game had rules, even supernatural ones. I stood up, my legs steadier than they had been in hours. "I don't accept this," I said firmly, my voice echoing in the twisted landscape. "I reject your reality." The world around me flickered like a glitch in a computer program. Emma appeared before me, her form shifting rapidly between human and monster. "You can't leave," she hissed, her voice distorting. "No one ever leaves." But I stood my ground. "I can and I will. This is not my world. This is not real." With each declaration, the world seemed to waver more. Cracks appeared in the sky and the buildings and Emma herself. I focused all my will on one thought. This is not real. I don't belong here. Emma lunged at me, her form now fully monstrous. But as her claws were about to reach me, she shattered like glass. The entire world followed suit, breaking apart around me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever came next. When I opened them again, I was in my car, parked on the side of a normal, quiet road. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Shaking, I looked at the clock. Only 10 minutes had passed since I'd first seen Emma on the roadside. Was it all a hallucination? A waking nightmare? Or something more sinister that I'd narrowly escaped? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. I started the car and drove home, vowing never to pick up a stranger again, no matter how lost they seemed. The neon lights of the city blurred as I cruised through the rain-slicked streets, my taxi's windshield wipers keeping tempo with the pounding in my chest. It was just past midnight, and I was already regretting taking the late shift. But bills don't pay themselves, right? I'd been driving for hours when I spotted him, a lone figure standing beneath a flickering streetlight. His arm shot out, and I pulled over, grateful for the fare. As he slid into the back seat, I caught a whiff of something metallic and musty. Probably just worked a late shift at some factory, I thought. "Where to, buddy?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat, but I could see his mouth twist into what might have been a smile. "Just drive," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll direct you." I shrugged and pulled away from the curb. As we drove, the city lights faded, replaced by the looming shadows of the suburbs. The houses grew fewer and farther between, until we were surrounded by nothing but darkness and the occasional flicker of my headlights on overgrown foliage. "Turn here," he suddenly commanded, pointing to a narrow dirt road I'd never noticed before. My instincts screamed at me to keep driving, to get as far away from this creep as possible. But something in his tone made me obey. As we bumped down the rutted path, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading towards something I'd regret for the rest of my life. The road seemed to go on forever, twisting through dense woods that pressed in on either side. Just when I thought we'd never reach our destination, a dilapidated house materialized out of the gloom. Its windows were dark, empty sockets, and the porch sagged like a broken jaw. "Stop here," my passenger said, his voice suddenly loud in the silence. I killed the engine, and the darkness swallowed us whole. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I heard the click of the back door opening, followed by his footsteps crunching on gravel. "Wait here," he ordered. "I'll be right back." I watched his shadowy figure disappear into the house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The longer I sat there, the more my curiosity battled with my fear. Finally, unable to stand it any longer, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The night air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something coppery and sickeningly familiar. As I approached the house, my beam of light caught something glinting in the overgrown grass. I bent down, my heart pounding, and picked up a small tarnished locket. Inside was a faded photo of a young woman, her smile frozen in time. With trembling hands, I pocketed the locket and crept towards the front door. It hung askew on its hinges, creaking softly in the night breeze. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my feet. Little did I know, I was about to uncover horrors beyond my darkest nightmares. The beam of my flashlight danced across peeling wallpaper and broken furniture, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. The air inside was heavy with the stench of rot and something else, something that made my stomach churn. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. A noise from upstairs made me freeze. It sounded like scratching. My rational mind told me it was probably just rats, but a primal part of me knew better. As I climbed the stairs, each step threatening to give way beneath me, I noticed dark stains on the wood. My light revealed them to be reddish-brown, old blood. My throat tightened, but I pressed on, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. At the top of the stairs, I found myself in a long hallway lined with closed doors. One stood slightly ajar, and from it came that scratching sound again. Swallowing hard, I approached and pushed it open. The smell hit me first, a wave of decay so strong it made my eyes water. As my light swept the room, I saw chains bolted to the walls, their links crusted with rust and darker substances. Tally marks covered every inch of the walls, some fresh, others faded with time. But it was the far corner that made my blood run cold. A figure huddled there, emaciated and filthy, its eyes reflecting the light like a wild animal's. She, let out a low moan that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What kind of monster had I brought to this place? And more importantly, how was I going to get us out alive? My heart pounding in my ears, I rushed to the chained woman. Up close, I could see the raw marks on her wrists and ankles where the metal had bitten into her flesh. Her eyes, wide with fear and hope, locked onto mine. "I'm going to get you out of here," I whispered, fumbling with the chains. But they were secured with heavy padlocks, impossible to break without tools. A creak from downstairs made us both freeze. He was coming back. Panic clawed at my throat as I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend us. "Hide," the woman rasped, her voice hoarse from disuse. "He'll kill you." Reluctantly, I ducked into a nearby closet, leaving the door cracked just enough to see. Moments later, heavy footsteps approached. The door swung open, and my passenger entered. In the dim light filtering through the grimy windows, I could finally see his face, and my blood ran cold. I recognized him from missing person posters plastered all over the city. But he wasn't the victim. He was the predator. All those women who had disappeared over the years, I was looking at their captor. He approached the chained woman, pulling something from his pocket. It glinted in the moonlight, a wicked-looking knife. As he raised it, I knew I had to act. Without thinking, I burst from the closet, tackling him to the ground. We grappled on the floor, the knife between us. I could feel its edge pressing against my throat, biting into my skin. In that moment, I realized I was fighting not just for my life, but for every person this monster had ever hurt. The struggle seemed to last an eternity. My arms burned with exertion as I fought to keep the knife away from my vital organs. The killer's eyes, inches from mine, burned with a madness that chilled me to my core. Suddenly, there was a sickening crack. The floorboards beneath us, weakened by years of neglect, gave way. We plummeted through the air, landing hard on the first floor in a shower of splintered wood and dust. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, scanning the debris for the knife. There, just out of reach. But as I lunged for it, a hand wrapped around my ankle, yanking me back. I kicked out blindly, feeling my foot connect with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip on my ankle loosened. This was my chance. I dove for the knife, my fingers closing around the handle just as the killer lunged at me again. What happened next was a blur of motion and desperation. I remember the resistance as the blade sunk into flesh, the warm gush of blood over my hands, the look of shock and rage on the killer's face as he realized he'd lost. As his body went limp, I heard sirens in the distance. Someone, maybe the chained woman upstairs, had managed to call for help. I slumped against the wall, the knife clattering from my blood-stained hands. In the days that followed, as the full extent of the killer's crimes came to light, I was hailed as a hero. But every night I'm haunted by the memory of that house and the evil that lurked within its walls. Some rides, it turns out, really are your last. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our tires as my partner Sarah and I wound our way through the dense forest. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway, just the two of us enjoying nature's beauty. Little did we know, our lives were about to take a terrifying turn. As we rounded a bend, I spotted something out of place, a small figure standing motionless by the roadside. "Sarah, do you see that?" I asked, slowing the car. As we approached, we realized it was a young boy, no older than 10, his clothes tattered and dirty. We pulled over, and Sarah cautiously approached him. "Hey there, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy remained silent, his eyes distant and unfocused. After a brief discussion, we decided we couldn't leave him alone in the woods. We coaxed him into the back seat, planning to find the nearest town and contact the authorities. As we drove, the boy finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The forest, it's angry." Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. "What do you mean, sweetie?" she asked gently. He turned those haunting eyes to me in the rearview mirror. "They're coming for us all." A chill ran down my spine, and I pressed harder on the accelerator. The trees seemed to press closer to the road, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. As darkness fell, an eerie mist began to rise from the forest floor. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched by something sinister. As night descended, our situation grew increasingly dire. The GPS signal vanished, leaving us lost in an endless maze of twisted trees. The boy in the back seat began to mutter incoherently about ancient curses and malevolent spirits. His ramblings sent shivers down our spines, but we tried to remain calm for his sake. Suddenly, a blood-curdling screech pierced the air. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What was that?" she whispered, fear evident in her voice. The boy's eyes widened in terror. "They're here," he whimpered. I slammed on the brakes as a massive, shadowy figure darted across the road. It was too big to be human, its movements unnaturally fluid. Sarah screamed as more shapes emerged from the darkness surrounding our car. Their eyes glowed an otherworldly green, fixed on us with predatory intent. "Drive!" Sarah yelled, and I didn't need to be told twice. I floored the accelerator, swerving around the creatures. They gave chase, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the night. The boy began chanting in a language I'd never heard before, his words seeming to agitate our pursuers even more. As we sped through the forest, the trees themselves seemed to come alive. Branches whipped at our windows, leaves swirled in unnatural patterns. I struggled to keep the car on the increasingly narrow and winding road. Sarah frantically tried to call for help, but our phones were dead. "We need to find shelter," I said, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We can't outrun them forever." Little did I know, our nightmare was only beginning. A dilapidated cabin loomed ahead, barely visible through the fog. With no other options, I steered towards it, praying it would provide some sanctuary. We rushed inside, slamming the door behind us. The boy immediately began drawing strange symbols on the dusty floor with his finger. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes now glowing with an eerie light. "Protecting us," he replied, his voice suddenly older, wiser. "But it won't hold them for long." As if on cue, something massive slammed against the cabin's walls. The windows rattled, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. Sarah and I huddled together, watching in horror as dark, oily tendrils began seeping through the cracks in the walls. The boy continued his frantic drawing, muttering incantations under his breath. The symbols on the floor began to glow faintly, pushing back the encroaching darkness. But with each passing moment, the assault on our refuge intensified. "Who are you?" I demanded, fear and confusion overwhelming me. "What's happening?" The boy paused, fixing us with a gaze that seemed centuries old. "I am a guardian," he said solemnly, "tasked with keeping the ancient evils of this forest at bay. But I failed, and now they've awakened." A horrifying realization dawned on me. We weren't here by chance. Something had drawn us here, using this boy as bait. We were part of something much bigger and more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. The cabin groaned under the relentless assault. The boy's glowing symbols were fading, and with them, our only protection. "We need to complete the ritual," he said urgently. "It's the only way to banish them back to their realm." He instructed us to join hands, forming a circle around the symbols. As we did, an otherworldly energy coursed through us. The boy began chanting, his voice resonating with power far beyond his years. The symbols pulsed with light, pushing back the encroaching darkness. But the entities outside weren't giving up easily. A tendril of darkness snaked through, wrapping around Sarah's ankle. She screamed in agony as it began to pull her away. I grabbed her, struggling to hold on as the thing tried to drag her into the shadows. "Don't break the circle!" the boy shouted over the cacophony of inhuman shrieks and splintering wood. Tears streaming down my face, I made the hardest decision of my life. I let go of Sarah's hand to maintain the circle. As Sarah was pulled into the darkness, her screams abruptly silenced. The boy's chanting reached a fever pitch. The symbols erupted in a blinding flash of light, and a shockwave of energy blasted outward. The cabin disintegrated around us, and I was thrown into the air. When I came to, the forest was silent. The oppressive presence was gone, but so was Sarah. The boy stood nearby, looking both relieved and sorrowful. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Her sacrifice saved us all." Dawn was breaking as we made our way out of the forest. The boy explained that he was the last of an ancient order, tasked with keeping the forest's dark entities contained. But as the world forgot the old ways, his powers had weakened, allowing the evil to grow stronger. "Your arrival was no accident," he said. "The forest called you here. It needed new guardians." I was shell-shocked, grief-stricken, and angry. "You used us," I accused. "Sarah is gone because of you." The boy's eyes filled with ancient sorrow. "I am truly sorry for your loss, but know that Sarah's sacrifice was not in vain. She now joins the ranks of the forest protectors, her spirit helping to maintain the balance." As we reached the edge of the forest, the boy stopped. "I can go no further," he said. "This is my realm now, but you have a choice to make. You can leave, try to forget all that's happened, or you can accept the mantle of guardian, help protect the world from the horrors that lurk in the shadows." I stood at the crossroads, torn between the desire to run far away from this nightmare and the pull of responsibility. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her final, terrified expression seared into my memory. In that moment, I made my choice. I couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. I turned back to the forest, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. As I stepped back into the trees, I felt a shift within me. The forest welcomed its new guardian, and I knew my life would never be the same.